Welcome to Lesson 5, which is all about privacy settings. So privacy rules are basically restrictions that control who can access or edit data on your app, and they help make your data more secure and private. So let's get started with that in this lesson. So we're currently within the Data tab in our Bubble interface, but before we create our privacy rules, let's first look at our data types. So I've went ahead and created two additional data types, being message and conversation. And these are basically the data types that we specified in our previous lesson on the Google Sheet. So if you want to follow along, you can also create these data types yourself. So as we remember, the conversation data type had two custom data fields, being messages, which is a list of messages or a list of this data type. And it also has a recipient, which has a type of user. And you'll notice that for most of the data types that you create, they are always built-in fields or data fields, such as the creator, the modified date, and the created date, and so forth. So you don't have to manually create these built-in fields yourself. And within the message data type, we have the conversation data field, which is basically linked to the conversation data type. Then we have a message body, which is of type text. So now that we have looked at these data types, let's go ahead and create our privacy rules. So to create our privacy settings, you go to the Privacy tab. And here's basically where you have to define a rule for each data type. So by default, each time you create a new data type, it has a public privacy rule. So this means that this type is visible to everyone, unless you define your own rule. So depending on the type of app that you're creating, you may want to set privacy rules, but sometimes you may not want to set privacy rules. For example, in a normal case scenario, you would obviously want to have this property data type publicly visible so that other people can see the type of properties that are listed on your app. But for example, for conversations and messages, you don't want this data to be public to everyone because this should basically be private data between the people that are involved in the conversation. So that's why it would be wise to create a privacy rule for both the conversation data type and the message data type. So let's start with defining a privacy rule for the conversation data type. So to do that, simply click on Define a New Rule. So you can name it anything you want. We'll go ahead with Conversation Privacy and click Create. And then here you'll see two boxes. One box is where we set our custom privacy rules, which basically control who has access to this data type. And then the other box is basically privacy rules for everyone else. So let's now create a custom privacy rule for this data type. So to start, we can say that when this conversation's creator is the current user, or when this conversation's recipient is the current user, then users who match this rule can view all fields, yes, find this in searches, yes, and view attached files, yes. So basically, any user who matches this rule will be able to view all the fields, find this in searches, as well as view attached files. And then for everyone else, we don't want them to view all fields. We don't want them to find this in search. And we don't want them to view attached files. So now this basically means that the conversation will be restricted to both individuals who are involved in the conversation and not everyone else. So that's basically how we can create a privacy rule for this data type. And as a quick tip, you'll realize that sometimes we have this bubble icon here, which basically allows you to create a note. So perhaps in the future, if you want to remind yourself what this rule is for, you can basically add a note that this rule restricts data to two individuals, being the creator and the recipient of this conversation. Next, let's create a privacy rule for the message data type. And we can click on Define a New Rule, and we can name it as Message Privacy. Then click Create. Again, we can say that when current user is this message's conversation creator, or when current user is this message's conversations recipient, then they can view all fields, check. They can find this in searches, check. And they can view attached files, check. So again, all the users who match this rule will be able to view all the fields, find this in searches, as well as view attached files. Now for everyone else, we don't want them to view the fields, we don't want them to find this in searches, and we don't want them to view attached files. Again, you can leave a note if you wish to do so. So this is basically how you can create privacy rules in order to make your data more secure and private. And that's the end of this lesson. And in the next one, we'll learn about custom states and reusable elements, which are commonly used features that make it easier to build complex apps. So all that and more in the next lesson.